speaking very generally, is you want to give investors every single reason to say yes, and you want to remove all of their reasons to say no. And that's very much the idea of this entire exercise. And how close you can come to that ideal is generally how close you're going to get to being investment ready.
Welcome back to the business behind your business. And look, we're about to have another conversation to help you grow your business into a successful, thriving business. And one of those conversations that we've sort of been dancing around the edge of is how do we raise money for our business? And look, we've talked about the limited finance opportunities for people when they're first starting the business, unless you self-fund it. And looking now, I guess, at you've got your business established. It's a legitimate startup. You're solving a real problem. You've got a product in development, but how do you grow to the next stage? And most people say, well, let's look at getting some investment, some outside investment. So how do we go about that? And what's the cleanest way? Because I've seen a lot of, scary horror stories from people who have gone and raised money and not had good advice, and they've been burned by that process. They've invested a lot of time. They've lost a lot of equity. They've lost a lot of money in the process. And at the end of the day, they don't have a saleable product or a saleable company. We want to avoid that. So we want to give you the best advice possible going forward about things to be aware of when you're looking to raise capital. Now, as always, we bring our experts to the microphone, and today we have Roshan Sidhu from Frank Law, who's going to help us understand a bit more about what's involved in getting our business, investment ready. So, Roshan, welcome to the microphone.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure. I think in a nutshell, it's about getting yourself investment ready should be looked at as a holistic process. It's about getting the entire organization, your staff, your co-founders, yourself, mentally and almost emotionally ready for raising capital. You're going to go from being essentially responsible to just yourself or just your team to being responsible to external third-party investors. And that's a significant difference, and it's something to definitely be cautious about. And there are definitely horror stories of, if you don't properly set yourself up, if you don't really understand what you're doing, you don't understand the end goal of what you're trying to achieve, that is generally a sign that things are not going to go well. I like to call it getting investment ready as a holistic process. And I sort of go by 3 acronyms: CLM, or to be, your organization's got to be clean, it's got to be lean, and you have to be mean. So when I talk about clean, investors don't want to see ridiculously complicated corporate structures. They don't want to see 7 different types of shares. They want to look at it and go, yeah, right. In 5 minutes, I can look at your ASIC extract and I know all I need to know about the company. I know everything I need to know about your corporate structure. They don't need it. You shouldn't need a thesaurus and a dictionary and a private investigator just to figure out who's who in the zoo, so to speak. So yeah, that's basically on the clean aspect. Don't overcomplicate things. Get advice early so you don't end up paying for things you don't need.
Yeah, and there's a lot of different ways that I see people complicate things, and it comes down to, not getting the right advice to start with. So the structure, so having the wrong structure in place to start the business, and even some of the agreements that they've got in place. So they may have agreements for funding from certain types of lenders or even family members, but they're not structured correctly. The ownership has been split too widely. You've got third cousins that have somehow got money invested in the company. A lot of complication, but I think what I'm hearing you say is that the cleaner and the simpler the structure going from the beginning, the better from somebody looking in. Now, and look, we'll come back to this, but there's probably also an issue about separating intellectual property from the operating structure as well in that. Yep. I think.
Yeah, and I think that's something people forget, or they try and do it themselves. Like, for instance, a really popular corporate structure would be your classic dual company holding structures or dual company structures, where you have a holding company on top, which holds the IP and where the investor cash comes in. And then underneath, you have a 100% owned subsidiary that effectively hires staff, deals with suppliers, deals with clients, that kind of thing. In some cases, you have a IP holding company here that might do external licensing and stuff like that. One of the most common mistakes I've seen is you have the organization set up, but sometimes you don't record it properly. So the intention is, yes, you've got company A, company B, where company B is supposed to be a subsidiary of company A, but he ends up just making it, oh yeah, I'll be a 100% shareholder of that. So what in effect you've done is just created two completely separate companies for some reason. And another mistake that I've seen very often is they don't get an IP assignment and licensing going in the right directions, and investors just go and look at it and go, okay, where's the IP sitting? And they don't know. And that's a huge red flag. If you don't know where your IP is, the investor's going to say, look, you're probably not ready for fundraising at this stage.
Yeah, and look, we could spend a bit of time talking about IP, but I think the best way to deal with that is to say to listeners, look, go back through the back issues of the podcast and listen to Andre Meyer's episode where he's talking about intellectual property and getting that right from the beginning. And if you want to find that episode, go to the businessbehindyourbusiness.com website and look for the podcast, and you'll find that episode from Andre. But Roshan, what else do we need to keep in mind? Because I think that having a clean structure and clean processes at the beginning is essential. But the next acronym I think you came up with was lean.
Yes. So lean, I think, goes a lot to how well you're allocating capital in your business and fundamentally what your cash flow management is. It's interesting. Founders are hyper focused on product risk, product market fit, as they should be. Like, I'm not trying to downplay the importance of this. It's critical. But a lot of the time they don't fully account for how do you manage your cash properly. Like, at its essence, how do you budget? And that can come in hiring too many people too soon, not understanding the difference between an independent contractor and an employee, figuring out, especially for tech businesses, when exactly do you bring external development in-house, when do you keep it external, how exactly do you keep all this 10 to 100 different balls juggling. And too often I see founders making the mistake of bringing on too many permanent staff too soon, and your fixed costs, which are what salaries are in this instance, are too high to especially justified against the current revenue you have. And what happens is you end up burning cash too quickly, and then on a optical, I guess, external optics perspective, you look bad to your investor because you're not really across your cash flow. And from an internal perspective, you burn your cash too fast, you run out of runway, and yeah, this isn't a hobby. Like, people want to be paid, and as they should, and that's it. Like, a business folds and everyone goes home because you just ran out of money when there's actually a good business right there. And I've seen it happen. Well, I see it happen all the time. It's a ongoing issue.
I think there's two different ways that this problem occurs, and one is looking from your small, I guess, a small startup where a founder has come from a background where they've developed a product and they are trying to bootstrap and do everything themselves. And I guess the problem there is that they're too lean. They don't use outside stuff. But yes. I think the other problem I've seen is where a founder of a startup has come from a larger organization and they're so used to having all of those resources available. They're so used to having their own marketing department, their own development, their own quality and risk person. And they sort of assume that they've got to have all of those in place and on board to make it a success, but that's not really the case.
No, that's exactly right. And I've seen founders go too conservative with their spend, and they don't pay for the right advice, and that sort of comes back to bite them in the end. But more often than not, it's the reverse, where exactly as you put it, they come from larger organizations where they're very used to being part of a larger team or running a larger team in the context of having all this infrastructure around you. And they either underestimate how much external support they need or overestimate how much support they need. So they either try and do too much themselves, which takes away their time from focusing on the business, or they try and outsource too much too early. And then one, they lose visibility in what they're doing, which has IP consequences. You're not really sure who is across your product. And you just have too many contractors. Like, you get to a stage where how much of this is your baby? How much ownership does the founder really have? And that doesn't look great to investors as well, because they're saying, yeah, hey, you've got 100 different contractors. Why can't I just go to them and build me something, the same thing? Like, why am I coming to you? I can get someone else to project manage all of them, which is, something you definitely want to avoid as well.
Yeah. So, and I think, look, if you've got too many people on board, you lose control, but you also, I guess one of the other things I've seen a lot of startups do is that they feel that to attract the right kind of person, or to attract a person at a lower rate of pay, they've got to offer equity to this
Yes.
person. And
Yep.
there's a risk there of offering too much equity, not doing that properly, but also making too many promises of ownership and diluting how much ownership of the business you have.
Yeah, and look, this is a broader point, not just with staff, but with fundraising. Like, obviously, you've got two main options when it comes to fundraising: debt and equity. For most early stage startups, debt is not available to you unless you personally guarantee it by refinancing a house or something similar. But I think startups sometimes forget that equity is often the most expensive capital of them all, because equity comes with strings, and once you give it out, it is extremely difficult to get back. And I've seen many really interesting and potentially very successful startups fail because they give out too much equity too early. There's a disagreement because, hey, people are people, and you're at a deadlock, or you need to potentially bankrupt the company just to buy the equity back, and that's the end of the project. So costing your ESOPs properly, getting it done properly, because I think people forget that the due diligence process that all startups go through is a very intense examination of everything in your business, and it sort of turns up stuff that is not ideal, it's not good. And look, for some of it, it can be fixed. It's just something you don't need to worry about as an early stage startups. But in a lot of times, it's a red flag for investors because you haven't properly done your homework. And the idea is very much spend at least 3, preferably 6 months getting your organization ready. So you clean up all of those red flags, hide all the skeletons, have everything nice and clean, ready to go. And it's got two benefits. One, you have a better business. Two, an investor goes in and just goes, sweet, I don't have to worry about all this DD. I just can focus on the financial and the commercial terms of the deal.
Mm. So, look, Roshan, you've mentioned a term there, which I think it's important for us to just unpack that a little bit. And we're looking at this idea of a due diligence. And can you just explain what a due diligence is, what the purpose is, and why it's critical to get your business cleaned up in preparation for one?
Yeah, so due diligence is essentially a discovery phase for investors. So what it is in its most, I guess, core form is basically you set up a data room, which can be as simple as a Google Drive folder, and you have a bunch of subfolders for all of your employment contracts, all of your services contracts, all of the key legal and just founding documents in the company. So that tells you a story. And for people who do this for a living, going through due diligence is effectively discovering the company story. And there's always a truth that founders put out, and then there's the actual truth, which you find in the data room. And what that difference is often is the difference between a yes or no on a check from an investor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And look, you mentioned about what the directors think is the story and what the investors will unpack. And so many times I get a new client for our accounting business, and what they tell me their ownership structure is nothing like what it actually is in paper and
Yes.
registered with ASIC. So
Yes.
it is critical to understand what your structure is and what all the pieces of the puzzle mean. And look, you mentioned also having all of those systems and documentation in place because it creates a better business.
Yep.
Yeah, always encouraging people to run their business better by having better systems. And if you're doing it for the purpose of selling your business or getting investment, even if that investment doesn't go ahead, it's a great thing to do in your business, because if you have a critical examination of your business from the perspective of somebody wanting to buy or invest in your business, you're going to fix things. You're going to fix them and you're going to improve them. And who's going to get the benefit? Well, that's going to be you, because
Yes.
you're the owner of the business. If you're improving your business to make it better, more attractive to somebody outside, it's going to be more attractive to you. So,
Absolutely. Yeah. That's exactly right, and it's one of those things where there's literally no lose in this situation. It's a win for investors because if they like your business already, which is usually when they would start DD, they go in and it's just a pleasant surprise. Like I've been on matters where DD was great and where matters where DD was not so good. And when DD is great, often it's a reinforcement of the investment team's original decision to invest because they've backed the right people and they're confident that the founders or the founding team have the skills, the capability, and the management acumen to run a business. And when it goes wrong, it's just a bunch of red flags, and it just massively increases the risk to an investor. And it just usually means that the company is probably not yet at the stage where it's investable at its core.
Mm-hmm. And I think, look, assuming we've got our business to a point where an investor wants to do due diligence, that I guess
Yes.
that's a preliminary step where we've got
Yes.
a business case for them. Before we get to that stage, I think the onus is there. We've got to get that cleaned up. We've got to have those systems, processes ready. And look, it comes also back to that control. If you're outsourcing all of this information, but you don't have it documented, you don't have control of your business. You don't have control of your processes.
Yeah, and getting advice on, the little things, understanding how to, how we call it, how to hire and fire with confidence, understanding how to run commercial transactions, what's a good way to go to negotiate, what's a good way to not negotiate, when to walk away. Like, all of these things are important during the investing process and getting yourself ready for investment, but look, they help massively with running the business as well. And a lot of the problems that we see with the founders sometimes that I work with is they forget that, sure, the product's important, but at its core, you have to run or scale a business. And most founders, especially if they've never done that before, they sometimes forget that if you don't know how to run a business, that probably means that you're probably not going to make your startup a success, because you can't actually manage people, you can't manage money, and investors pick up on that. It's very clear when you go through DD, when you look at the financials, when you look at the timeline of things, whether or not the founders know how to run a business. So the idea is very much, before you worry about getting investors, work on the product, make sure it's something that someone wants, and learn how to run a business. Not necessarily to one person, but find a team that can do it. And just very quickly touching on the third element of getting investment ready, the meanness part of it. When I say meanness, I mean this isn't a passion project. It's a serious business. People are relying on you for employment. It's not a hobby. You have to be ruthless when it comes to making decisions. Investors will want to know, like, one of the first things they would do is they'll pull up an ASIC report and look, who are the shareholders, who's going to be sitting with them on the cap table, who are the board of directors, what are their value add, what are they bringing to the table, how are they going to be helping you run the business. And for too many founders, they put in really early stage, potentially family and friends who help them early on with the business. And look, when you're really small, that's fine, but the second you get institutional money or serious money, you have to ask yourself, do these people still contribute to the company? Like, is their value add sufficient to remain on, well, not to say not remain on the cap table, but to remain on the board? Because I can assure you, investors will ask these questions. And if they don't like what they're seeing, or they feel that you're not being clear-minded or ruthless enough, that is a red flag for them, because that probably means that you're not really serious about this. And I'm willing to make those difficult decisions that you need to do as a founder and a business owner.
Yeah. Look, and having family members involved is a great way of getting some what we call that seed capital, or that first step of capital. But it does come out with a cost. I remember listening to one very successful entrepreneur and who did have some family involved in the initial investments of their business. And I remember her having to recount the conversation she had when she fired her mum. And look, I think this woman has gone on to become one of the wealthiest and most well respected real estate moguls in the US. But having to have that conversation with family members, it's not quite a fit going forward. It's a lot easier to have at the beginning of the process than during the due diligence or investment process.
It is, and one of the key things that I sort of emphasize is, when you're going to the investment raising or process, or the investment or the fundraising process, you have to have a clear understanding on what you're looking to get out of it. You have to have a clear understanding how much you're looking to raise, how much equity you're looking to give away, what's a red line, what's a blue line where it's movable, and a clear and very solid plan on how you're going to deploy that capital. And you got to be ready to justify. You got to be able to justify everything. You got to be able to justify, if you say, for instance, you're raising $1 million and 200,000 of that is going to marketing. You have to tell your investor, right, okay, you've given me this large bucket of funds. What exactly are you going to spend on it? Or how exactly is this going to go to marketing? What's your return on investment, even internally? And it's important to to find this out first before you have a meeting with an investor, because that way you have a much clearer idea of where you need to grow, what's your scaling strategy, and what's your plan. And the idea is, just speaking very generally, is you want to give investors every single reason to say yes, and you want to remove all of their reasons to say no. And that's very much the idea of this entire exercise. And how close you can come to that ideal is generally how close you're going to get to being investment ready.
Mm. Look, I think one of the keys here is that often when we talk about capital raising for startups, the conversation and the thought process automatically goes to, okay, who is going to lend me the money? Who's going to invest in my business? How do I get access to those people who are going to put me in touch with people who are going to invest in my business? And a lot of time when that conversation goes straight there, we ignore all the things that we've been talking about in this podcast of getting your business ready. Because if your business is not ready, the approach to a potential investor or a potential, facilitator is gonna do damage.
It is. See, getting money in, external money that is from a VC or an external source, too early before you're ready is not a good thing, because suddenly you have external obligations and responsibilities and you still haven't figured out, I guess, the nuts and bolts of your business, and you're not fully across it yet. And there are many occasions where some of my previous clients, they've got money in too soon. They can't really manage it. They not even run out of room. They just realize that this isn't really going anywhere. And then from an investor's perspective, they're here to do this professionally. This isn't a hobby for them. The slightest sign of risk, they'll just say, "All right, it's been fun, guys. Give us back our money or whatever's left of it." And that's it. That's essentially it. And you go back home. And yeah, so figuring out exactly what you need from it and what you're looking to get out of it, and knowing when to walk away. And yeah, it's interesting. It's sometimes more of an art rather than a science. If you can bootstrap it as long as possible, that's great. But if you do it too long, you miss out on the ability to scale rapidly, which is what you get with external capital. So how to manage that properly is a tricky exercise. And from a legal perspective, one of the things that I often find myself doing is outlining what are the risks are, and what are the pros and cons with the different ways that you could raise money. Are you doing it for a straight price round? Are you using a safe note? Are you using a convertible note? What are the pros and cons and key terms of each, and which one you should do? And ultimately, that depends on the stage you are at as a startup, the health of your business, and potentially how you're managing your cash flow.
Mm-hmm. I love the way that you said being prepared to walk away from a deal, because I think one of the big issues for startup founders is how passionate they are about their business and how much the business is a natural extension of themselves. Yep. They're not prepared to walk away. So the emotional cost is severe when things go wrong.
It is, yeah, and rightly or wrongly, they consider their startups. That's their baby, that's their passion project, and exactly as you put it, the success or failure of that, they take it deeply personally, and it's almost like it's a reflection of their success and failure or their worth in life. And there are benefits to that in the sense that it gives you a lot of passion, and obviously it's good. It's a a great thing being able to work and do what you love. But on the other hand, it makes it very difficult to walk away. The sunk cost fallacy really ramps up at that sort of thing. And it applies on both on a macro scale and a micro scale. So micro scale, it might be one or two smaller investors where they're not going to do the whole round, or if they're doing the whole round, they're prepared to make your life easy, but those terms are not great for you in the business long term. But because you can't let it go and you can't walk away and you can't, or you won't take a risk that you'll delay the round for a bit to find the right fit, most founders will just jump on that money, and that leads to problems later on. And on a micro level, on individual transactions and deals, if it's something that they feel that they need to get that first keystone moment, so your first milestone, first contract, go revenue positive, and sometimes you're willing to take anything you can get just to get that milestone, and it often bites you in the end. And yeah, and honestly, with investors, sometimes founders forget that while of course their money is good and it's a key reason you want to have them, the main benefit that investors are supposed to bring you is their knowledge, their experience, and their networks. The main reason you should have as a startup for choosing X investor over Y, or X profile of investor over this is because your product, your startup, your business journey will benefit from those particular networks or that multiplier effect of having so and so VC or so and so family office on your cap table or on your board.
Yeah, and that's something that came up when we were talking with Merrill Johnson about scaling businesses and getting outside investment, like actually understanding the value of what that investor can bring to you. I think that is a topic I'd love to unpack with you in another episode, because I think we could talk for a lot longer about that particular aspect of raising capital for your business. Roshan, is there a key thing that you want people to take away? What's the key thing about raising capital or getting your business, I guess, more correctly, investment ready?
I think the main takeaways is you have to understand that it's a process, not a one-off event. It's all about getting the entire organization investment ready holistically. So your employment, your IP, your sales, everything has got to be running as efficiently as you can manage it. So that's sort of point one. Point two is really understanding your business and understanding what is the key end goal or key commercial objectives you're looking to get out of a round. And then everything sort of flows backwards from that, because if you really understand what the end goal is, that's where you know how to set those goalposts, those red lines. I mean, insert applicable cliche, but that's where you can sort of feedback and figure out where the red lines are. And that's sort of the core of it. And honestly, in terms of legals, it's a small part of it. But again, it flows from an understanding of what your business is, where you're looking to go, and what you're prepared to give away in getting there.
Yeah, that's great. Look, Roshan, I'm sure there are listeners that want to find out more, want to get in touch with you. What's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, they can reach out to me on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn profile is just my name, Roshan Sidhu, or they can drop me an email address, or yeah, those are sort of two of the main ways. I'm sure we can provide my email details at the end of this podcast, and I'm always very happy to have a chat. Like, a lot of what I do is honestly trying to facilitate connections between like-minded people, and the legal work is often just a consequence of that.
Yeah, that's great. So we'll definitely put Roshan's contact details in the show notes, and the show notes for all of our episodes can be found on most listening apps, podcast listening apps that you subscribe to. Or if you want to check them out in more detail, head over to the businessbehindyourbusiness.com website, and all the show notes from our previous episodes are there as well. Now, Roshan has raised a number of great points here, and a lot of food for thought to think about. And look, if you have a specific question that you'd like us to do as a follow-up to this conversation, then please reach out to us. You can email us at podcast@thebusinessbehindyourbusiness.com, and we'd love to answer your question and really, I guess, unpack it and give you some great advice to help you take your business forward. Roshan, it has been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today. Thank you very much for giving up your time to speak to us and our listeners at The Business Behind Your Business.
No worries at all. Happy to help.